On Friday, Gooney Bird was wearing capri pants, a satin tank top, and a long string of pearls. Her red hair was twisted into one long braid, which was decorated with plastic flowers. There were flip-flops on her feet. "You look beautiful," Kiko said to Gooney Bird in an admiring whisper. "Yes, I know," Gooney Bird replied. "Thank you, Kiko." She walked to the front of the classroom when Miss Pigeon told her it was time. Malcolm was back in the classroom. He was at his desk writing, "I will never put anything in my nose," 100 times on a piece of lined paper. The nurse had told him to do that. She said it would keep his hands busy. "How come Gooney Bird gets to stand in front of the class?" Malcolm asked. "Shh!" Everybody except Felicia Ann said to Malcolm. "Listen." "Today," Gooney Bird said, "I have a very exciting story to tell you. In my story, there is a long journey, a mystery, and a rescue." Miss Pigeon, seated at her desk, had begun correcting some spelling papers. She looked up. "Listen, second graders," she said. "Hear the different things that Gooney Bird is putting into her story? That is what good storytellers do." Gooney Bird listened patiently to the teacher. Then she stood up straight and did some breathing exercises. Finally, she took a deep breath and looked at the class. "I am ready to begin," she said at last. "The title of the story for today will be How Gooney Bird Came from China on a Flying Carpet." "Just like Aladdin," Barry Tuckerman said in a loud whisper. "Barry, pay attention, please," Gooney Bird said. "I like to have absolutely all eyes on me." Then, when the class became silent, all except Felicia Ann, who had been silent all along, and almost all eyes, even Miss Pigeon's, were on her, she began. How Gooney Bird Came from China on a Flying Carpet. Once upon a time, just last month, Mr. and Mrs. Greene decided to take their little girl, Gooney Bird, and move away from the place where they had always lived. They had always lived in China, but now Mr. Greene had a new job, and his new job was in Water Tower. "That's here," Chelsea said aloud. "I live in Water Tower." Gooney Bird stopped talking. She arranged her pearl necklace so that it was draping over one shoulder. "Me too," Tricia said. "We all live in Water Tower," Ben pointed out. "That's why we go to Water Tower Elementary School." "Class," Miss Pigeon warned. "Miss Pigeon," Gooney Bird said politely, "let me take care of this." "Children," she said in a firm voice, "I cannot tell a story if I am constantly interrupted. There will be time for questions and comments. Please raise your hand if you want to say something. It is very distracting for me if you call out." "Sorry," Tricia said. "Sorry," Chelsea said. "Sorry," Ben added. The class waited. Gooney Bird looked at them all sternly. Then she did some breathing exercises and began again. They had always lived in China, but now Mr. Greene had a new job, and his new job was in Water Tower. So they packed carefully. It took many days. First, Mr. Greene had to pack 43 sets of false teeth. Then Miss Greene had to pack her dancing shoes and her bathing suits. And Gooney Bird had to pack all of her belongings, which included a money collection. Finally, their furniture was loaded onto a moving van, and the Greene family waved goodbye as the moving van drove away from China and started its journey to Water Tower. Gooney Bird stopped. Every child in the classroom had a hand raised, and even Miss Pigeon was waving her arm. "I'll have an intermission now. For questions," Gooney Bird said. "Chelsea, yours first." "Why did Mr. Greene have 43 pairs of false teeth?" Chelsea asked. "The false teeth are not part of the story," Gooney Bird said. "Malcolm?" Malcolm had looked up from his "I will not put anything in my nose" paper. His eyes were very wide. "Tell about the money collection," he said. "That's another story," Gooney Bird said. "Beanie?" "When are you going to tell about the prince and the diamonds?" Beanie asked. Gooney Bird thought it over. "On Monday I'll tell it," she said. "Now, there's time for one more question before I continue. Miss Pigeon, did you have your hand raised?" Miss Pigeon nodded. "Gooney Bird," she said in a nice voice, "you have an amazing imagination, and we think you are wonderful at telling stories, don't we, class?" She looked around and almost all the children nodded. "But I want to be certain that the children understand that these are made-up stories. So I want to point out—" "My stories are all absolutely true," Gooney Bird said. "I want to point out," Miss Pigeon went on, "that of course we all know that China is a foreign country across the ocean, and that a moving van could never drive from China to Water Tower." Gooney Bird rearranged her pearls and sighed. "Miss Pigeon," she said, "why don't we take a few minutes for research? Is there an atlas in the bookcase?" Miss Pigeon laughed and said, "Of course." She went to the bookcase and took out a book of maps called an atlas. "Now," said Gooney Bird, "would you find out if there are other Chinas?" "Other Chinas? I don't think—" Miss Pigeon began turning the pages of the atlas. She found the index at the back. "My goodness," Miss Pigeon said after a minute. "There's a China in Texas." "Correct," said Gooney Bird. "And what else?" "There's a China in Maine." Correct, said Gooney Bird. And California, there's a China Lake. Oh, and my goodness, look, in North Carolina. And now it is time to continue the story, Gooney Bird announced. Where were we? Oh yes, I remember. The moving van had just left China. She took up the story again. After the moving van left China, the Greene family loaded up their station wagon with 5 big suitcases. Then they had added a lawnmower that they had forgotten to put in the moving van, a cooler full of ham sandwiches and iced tea, a bundled up stack of National Geographics, and an orange and white cat named Catman, who had no tail because he had flicked his former tail once under the lawnmower. The last thing they put into the station wagon was a rolled-up rug from the front porch of their house. It was too long to fit. They tried it sideways and folded and upside down, but it still wouldn't fit. Let's leave it behind, Mr. Greene suggested, but Miss Greene began to cry. It was my mother's, she said. There's a stain on it where my mother spilled some black bean soup 40 years ago. I feel sentimental about this rug. So Mr. Greene agreed to take the rug because it made him cry too, if his wife cried. He decided to put the back window of the station wagon down so that the end of the rolled-up rug could stick out. He made certain that everything was nicely arranged and that Catman had a comfortable place to sleep on the back seat, just beneath the end of the rug and next to the place where Gooney Bird would sit. Mr. Greene and Mrs. Greene and Gooney Bird Greene all got into the car and drove away from China, starting their long journey to Water Tower. They drove for many, many hours. They ate all the ham sandwiches and drank all of the iced tea. They stopped to get gas. They went to the bathroom. They played the car radio and listened to news and operas and football games and talk shows about love relationships. Suddenly, Gooney Bird glanced down and noticed with dismay that her beloved Catman had disappeared. She looked around the floor of the back seat, but Catman was not there. She heard a small sound, like a purr, coming from inside the rolled-up rug. She knew that Catman had entered the rug. He probably found it a warm and dark and cozy place. But Gooney Bird was worried about Catman. She decided to try to get him out. She reached into the rolled-up center of the rug, but he slithered away beyond her hands. She looked at the backs of her parents' heads, wondering if she should tell them about the problem with Catman. But her mother was dozing and her father was driving, watching the road carefully and listening to a radio program about whales. So Gooney Bird decided to wiggle into the rug herself to rescue Catman. "Oh no," Kiko cried. "I am going to faint." "Shh," the other children said. It was dark and dusty and a very tight squeeze inside the rolled-up rug. But Gooney Bird wiggled inch by inch toward Catman. Catman slithered away inch by inch. She could see his glittering eyes as he backed away from her hands. Gooney Bird was determined to rescue him. She continued forward. Suddenly, an amazing thing happened. Even though Gooney Bird was not very large and did not weigh very much and was not wearing her heavy diamond earrings from the palace that day, her weight inside the rug caused it to tilt. At that moment, Mr. Greene leaned forward to change the radio station, and the car went over a pothole in the road. The rolled-up rug, containing both Catman and Gooney Bird, slid out from the back of the station wagon and flew through the air before it landed at the side of the road in some thick grass beside a fence post. A cow chewing a purple flower looked curiously at it and then wandered away. The station wagon drove on, around a curve in the road. Slowly the rug unrolled. Catman's fur was standing on end, and if he had a tail, his tail would have been sticking straight up in the air. For a moment, Catman stood still, looking at Gooney Bird. Then he ran away, very fast. Gooney Bird sat up. She was not entirely sure what had happened, but she was not hurt. She simply wondered where her family was, and her cat, and the car. Other cars stopped and people got out. Many people offered her a drink of water from their bottles of Evian, but Gooney Bird wasn't thirsty. After a while, a police car with a flashing light came. A TV reporter came, and a cameraman. While the policeman talked on his radio, the TV reporter, a woman with very large hair, interviewed Gooney Bird and called her the little girl who had a flying carpet ride. In the interview, Gooney Bird described Catman and asked people to call the station if they found him, but she never got Catman back. Eventually, the police car took her to her parents, who were both crying at a gas station 4 miles down the road. When Gooney Bird and her parents were finally reunited, everyone, including the 2 policemen, a TV reporter, and the gas station owner, hugged and kissed and did the tango. The end. "What a lovely story," Miss Pigeon said, "and an exciting one too, but a little sad to lose your kitty in that way." "Catman is not a kitty," Gooney Bird said. "He's a cat. And I didn't say that I lost him, I just said I never got him back." "So no one found him and called the TV station?" "Actually, they did," Gooney Bird replied. "But where is Catman now?" asked Miss Pigeon. "He was consumed by a cow," Gooney Bird said. But that's a different story. By a cow? You're joking, Miss Pigeon said. No, said Gooney Bird. I'm not joking. I tell only absolutely true stories. Tell it, the children called. I will, Gooney Bird said. Another day.